When a catastrophic earthquake strikes, our screens are immediately flooded with images of the rubble, the brave rescue workers, and those crucial boxes of aid being handed out to survivors. But what we rarely ever see is the incredibly complex, often chaotic machinery required to actually get those boxes there in the first place. So today, in this explainer, we are unpacking a really fascinating report. It's titled Revised Methodology and Action-Oriented Study of Local Procurement in the 2023 Syrian Earthquake Response. We're going to explore exactly what happens when academics step completely out of the classroom and deploy straight into disaster zones to figure out how we can make humanitarian supply chains actually work. Let's dive in. Right off the bat, we have to talk about a pretty staggering reality. Between 65 and 80% of all humanitarian logistics expenditures go directly to procurement. Just think about that for a second. When you donate $1 to disaster relief, the vast majority of that money is consumed just by the sheer act of buying and moving stuff. It proves just how massive this hidden machinery really is. It literally is the absolute core of any emergency response. Now, you might be wondering what humanitarian procurement actually looks like on the ground. Well, it goes way beyond standard commercial purchasing. We're not just talking about ordering office supplies here. It's the incredibly complex acquisition of everything, and I mean everything, needed for disaster relief. Sure, that means basic food and temporary shelter, but it also includes highly specialized debris removal equipment, complex data collection tools, and crucial pharmaceuticals. It is the absolute linchpin that dictates whether those relief resources end up saving lives or whether they fall dangerously short. Section 1. The push for local aid. For decades, the standard emergency response was basically to fly massive pallets of aid from all across the world straight into a disaster zone. But recently, agencies have been desperately trying to rethink this approach. Why? Well, traditional international sourcing in places like Syria frequently entails lead times exceeding 3 months, not to mention astronomically high transport costs. But if you buy locally, you get a rapid response, you get culturally appropriate supplies, and crucially, it actually stimulates the domestic economy, generating jobs right when these communities need them the absolute most. So the big push right now is to buy locally to empower shattered communities. It's a huge shift from a global push system to a local pull system.
Section 2, Academics in the Disaster Zone.
Okay, so if local sourcing is such a no-brainer, why is it so incredibly difficult to actually pull off in a crisis? To find out, researchers did something pretty bold. They deployed directly into the heavily impacted disaster zones of Latakia, Idlib, and Aleppo right in the middle of the 2023 earthquake response. To get the real story, they used a methodology called participant observation. Basically, they embedded themselves directly into the chaos to observe the supply chain in real time, systematically recording events and behaviors exactly as they unfolded naturally. It's a very gritty, hands-on reality. In fact, the primary researcher already had over a decade of experience in Syrian humanitarian operations, which gave them this unprecedented day-to-day access to the real coordination of the earthquake response. And to truly grasp the academic rigor of this field research, you have to look at the scope of what they did. Over a 3-month longitudinal period, they ran 35 semi-structured interviews and kept detailed daily research diaries. They sat down with 20 UN staff members across various sectors. They interviewed 5 local business owners, like construction and clothing vendors, plus they spoke with local NGOs and international partners. They systematically documented the raw, unfiltered perspectives of the very people trying to buy and deliver this aid. Through this mountain of data, the researchers uncovered a clear chronological journey. They mapped out these local procurement challenges into 3 distinct phases. And this is going to be our roadmap as we track a relief dollar from the initial earthquake shock all the way to final delivery. We've got Phase 1, pre-contracting, Phase 2, during contracting, and finally, Phase 3, post-contracting. Phase 1, pre-contracting in a crisis. Imagine the immediate aftermath. The dust hasn't even settled. This profound initial shock collided head-on with a Syrian market that was already heavily degraded by years of conflict and strict international sanctions. The researchers witnessed some frantic hurdles right out of the gate. First up, there was an acute, localized scarcity of specialized equipment, things like heavy machinery and water tanks. The local vendors, they just didn't have the capacity. Second, there were these massive data black holes. Because coordination was so fragmented, agencies were taking 48 hours or more just to build functional initial databases so they could figure out who actually needed what. And because of the extreme life-or-death urgency, agencies just couldn't run standard background checks. They were forced to rely on unverified, completely unevaluated local vendors just to get the ball rolling. Phase 2, the chaos of contracting.
So now we enter the phase where the actual buying begins. And this is exactly where the beautiful theory of local procurement violently slams into chaotic reality. You immediately see this huge institutional friction. On one side, international donors heavily mandate and prioritize funding the rehabilitation of public infrastructure. But on the flip side, the affected populations on the ground, they were consistently telling the assessment teams that they demanded the immediate repair of their private housing. It's a massive tug of war that severely complicates what the procurement teams are even allowed to buy.
Add to that nightmare something the researchers termed the warehouse deficit. Across all the affected areas, there was a total lack of agency-managed warehousing. And look, if you don't have anywhere to safely store goods, aid agencies lose absolutely all of their operational flexibility. You can't buffer supplies, you can't delay distributions to coordinate them better. Instead, you're forced into these incredibly inflexible direct delivery models, sending fragmented local vendors out into a dangerous, chaotic delivery network. And as you'd expect, that causes massive logistical bottlenecks. The researchers also documented some truly bizarre administrative hurdles that just compounds the chaos. Agencies had to fragment their contracts across multiple small vendors, which of course wildly inflated their administrative workloads. Then they faced compulsory mandates from local authorities to equip makeshift public schools, which disrupted the equitable distribution of aid. And, get this, in the middle of a literal life-or-death crisis, agencies and vendors were wasting vital funds and causing environmental damage by obsessing over redundant, customized, branded cardboard packaging for the relief kits. Just incredible. Phase 3. Building better humanitarian logistics. So what happens when you combine compromised markets, rushed vetting, and these fragmented, messy deliveries? Well, it leads us to the very dark side of bypassing standard procedures, the ethical blind spot. The field research revealed that skipping a proper verification window completely obscured critical deficiencies in vendor working conditions. We're talking severe lapses in operational safety, poor hygiene, and even failures in child labor protocols. Driven by pure, extreme urgency, these agencies inadvertently ended up contracting commercial actors with terrible ethical practices. It is a really painful, systemic compromise. Let's walk through it. Step 1, the extreme crisis demands rapid action. Step 2, this forces agencies to bypass standard competitive tendering and just opt for direct contracting to save time. But then step 3, this ultimately leads to unqualified vendors delivering substandard products and services. Skipping steps to save time actually damages the quality of the very aid you were trying to deliver, completely straining trust and accountability on the ground. All of this leaves us with one final, incredibly vital question. In a catastrophic emergency, especially in a heavily restricted market like Syria, how do we balance the desperate need for operational speed with the absolute necessity of humanitarian integrity? It's not an easy answer, but that is exactly why these academics are deploying out of their universities and into these dangerous field environments. By systematically observing the chaos, documenting every bottleneck, and rigorously analyzing the data, they are helping to build a much better framework for the future, ensuring that when the next disaster inevitably strikes, every single relief dollar actually goes towards saving lives.